Hello, everyone. Welcome to Miami Beach Urban Studios Live Art Talk. I'm Colette Mello, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm here today with artist, art administrator, curator, and educator Adrienne Chadwick. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the City of Miami Beach for their support for these art talks. Adrienne Chadwick is an artist, art administrator who has dedicated 27 years to reimagining art museums and advocating for excellence in the arts, culture, and education. She is founder of Culture Conduit Consulting, providing art education, public programming, community engagement, and diversity, equity, and inclusion resources to organizations across industries. Adrienne Chadwick has served as a curator of interpretation at Mississippi Museum of Art, director of education at Pérez Art Museum Miami, education manager at Nova Southeastern University Art Museum, Fort Lauderdale, and director of education and exhibitions at Young at Art Museum. Adrienne sits on selection boards, including National Endowment of the Arts, National Congressional Art Competition, Miami-Dade County Cultural Affairs, and is a board member of the Museums Association of the Caribbean. A studio art practice focuses on mixed media installations, expressing ideas related to power and resistance in society and nature, complements her cultural work. She earned a BFA from the University of Florida New World School of Arts and an MPA from Nova Southeastern University. Based in South Florida, born in Toronto, Canada, and a citizen of Belize, Central America, Chadwick is an avid traveler who has visited all 7 continents and is devoted to supporting cultural and customs in her local communities. Hi, Adrienne. Thank you for joining us. It's great to connect with you again.
Hi, Colette. Thank you so much for the invitation to be a part of MBUS Live Art Talks.
Thank you. Thank you. So why don't you can start sharing your screen if you like, and then if you want to just tell us where you are. And I remember you posting about you had went to all 7 continents when you were, I forgot how old you were. You said it was my last continent. And I was like, wow, that's amazing that you've done that.
Thank you. Yes, that's one of my claims to fame. It was hard to do that, but I did it before my 40th birthday. I did it.
Your 40th. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. So I started traveling internationally at 32 and then I finished at 39, all continents.
And all right, go ahead and share.
Okay, I'll share. All righty. So thank you again for the invitation to participate in the MBUS Live Art Talk series. I'm Adrienne Chadwick, like Colette said, and I'm an artist and art administrator. So I always like to start my talks with remembering where I came from. And that is from Toronto, Canada. But this is a picture of me in my tree house in Carol City, Florida, in Miami. Because when I was a little kid, I moved to Miami and have been here ever since in South Florida, Miramar, Alapata, Edgewater, and all over the place. So this is my little kid drawings and me in my treehouse. And at this time, I wanted to be a scientist and an artist and a teacher and a boss. So I think that museum administration and art, being an artist, kind of encompasses all of those things. This is my artist statement. Accumulation, repetition, and translucence expressing ideas related to power and resistance in society and nature. So the first group of works that I'm going to talk about is a series that I've been working on for quite a long time. It's a series that is called, and it has had different names over the years. This is called Tiki Taki. And this is a series of houses, small clay houses that were hand built with ceramic clay. And the first time that I made these houses, it was when I was attending New World School of the Arts and taking a sculpture class with an artist named Wendy Wisher. And it was kind of the end of the class of the semester. And I wanted to make this installation using Monopoly houses. And this was in the early 2000s. I guess we had like Google search and Wi-Fi and all that then, but we didn't have like that quick turnaround of ordering items and getting them sent to your house like we do now. And so I had called the number on the game box and contacted them, asked them if they, could send me lots of Monopoly houses. And they said, yes, absolutely, we definitely can. It'll take three to 4 months. And of course, that didn't really work out for my timeline because I needed to have my artwork for the final critique at the end of the semester. And so I was working at the time at Young at Art Children's Museum that has studios, ceramic studios and printmaking studios. And so I opted to make every single house by hand out of clay. And this series was all about the architectural history that you can find in South Florida. You can find it everywhere, but in South Florida, you can find it really well made in these long strips because we're such a linear geography here in South Florida. And so, of course, when the earliest settlements were being developed in Miami, all of the buildings that were built along the seaside. And then year by year, decade by decade, the more population that grew, the more different houses and buildings were built. And as technology advanced, the style of the houses advanced. So early on, the houses were smaller, made of wood. They had large lots. They were maybe on stilts because of flooding. Later on, they were kind of flat, low to the ground so that they don't get taken away by hurricanes. They had Florida rooms and verandas and ports, carports in order to allow circulation. And then air conditioning was invented and those houses, the land around the houses got smaller and the houses got bigger because the space that was lived in was lived underneath the air conditioning within the building. So there's a white earthenware clay, a beige, and a red earthenware clay in this series. And those can also, at the time, I kind of loosely wanted it to be related to ethnicity and race, but it was really more about the architecture when I first started this series. And later on, about 10 or more years later, Irreversible Projects invited me to participate in their Aqua art show during Miami Art Week in 2018. And so these pieces were on my website for years, and people continuously asked me to kind of bring these works out of the crates to show them at various shows. So here's another version. You can see those kind of Spanish Revival or Mediterranean Revival houses in the foreground, and then into the distance, you can see all of the different colors and sizes of houses. And then yet again, someone asked me to show these houses again. And this is kind of how it went for quite a few years. In 2019, a year later, William Cordova organized this show called Concrete Jungle, and he curated in Tiki Taki to this exhibition. But he, this time, instead of having them kind of separate and in straight lines, I started to install them how I install them, and he was the curator, and he said, hey, how about you squish them all together to kind of talk about the urban congestion that happens in cities. And so this version was a little bit different, smaller pedestal and all squished together.
Adrienne, where was this exhibited at?
This was Bridge Red.
Okay.
Bridge Red.
I saw the
Studios in
aqua one.
Miami.
My colleague Regina Bailey and I were in search of your work that year because she had seen you at a networking event, and you had shared with her you were in the fair. So we actually went looking for your work that year.
Perfect. Thank
And
you.
I didn't know you were, at that time, I didn't know you were making objects because I know you from the PAM. So I knew you from the PAM as the education manager there at the time.
Yes. Thank you for looking for my work at Aqua. That show is kind of a condensed show and really tight, and also the, always the traffic and the parking is always complicated. So thank you for making your way over there.
Of course, it was great.
Okay, so then I got fed up and I decided that after showing Tiki Taki many, many times, I was putting Tiki Taki away forever. And I decided that I didn't really, when people ask me, the next time somebody asks me about this Tiki Taki on my website, I'm going to make some new work. And that happened with this show called The Porch is the Tree is the Watering Hole. And that was at the African American Research Library and Cultural Center in Fort Lauderdale. The curator of the show was Dominique Dennis, and she invited me to participate in this show because they were looking for artists who were thinking about historically Black neighborhoods and kind of just, neighborhoods. And so I decided at this point to make my first new set of houses. And this was in 2019, I believe, when we started to do the planning for this show. And then the show opened in 2020. I changed the concept to align with the exhibition. And I decided to use this chocolate, beautiful, glossy, Black earthenware clay. They're about 1 inch or 1.5 inches each, all individually handmade intentionally to think about the labor of making the houses. And also with Tiki Taki, everything was individually handmade and intentionally. These are high fired. And so when they're low fired, they come out a different color, but high firing gives them this beautiful kind of gloss, this sheen over them. And this is the first time that I included thread in the installation of the houses. So this is 2 different installation shots of the piece. You can see that the thread that's there is kind of representing redlining and other housing inequities that happened in the United States throughout the last many decades. Particularly in the 1940s and 50s. There was a lot going on with gentrification. And this piece is called, this one is Resettlement, I believe. Yep, Resettlement. And later on in my presentation, I'm going to show you some of my research, but I started to just search for the information about what happened in the past in our neighborhoods here in South Florida. And I found lots and lots of research, maps from the 1940s and 50s and different studies that had been done in order to kind of not allow people to live next to each other during the Jim Crow era. And after segregation was illegal, there were political ways that segregation continued through some of these policies that were put together at this time, maybe intentionally and maybe unintentionally, but this is what happened. And so oftentimes other policies such as like giving loans and giving insurance and healthcare and education and where the money is funneled into the decisions that are made, that's what made some of these housing inequities. And that's in the back there, that's Adler Guerrier's piece. There's a lot of great artists in this show. It was up for quite a long time. We had a little kind of piece on Channel 4, segment on Channel 4, so that was awesome. And this is a really close close-up that the person who recorded that segment did. It's really nice. So the next exhibition that I was part of with my houses is Displacement, and is in tandem back and forth. And this was a show at Fat Village in Fort Lauderdale. The piece was called Displacement. And this one was again talking about gentrification. And this time I incorporated porcelain clay, white porcelain clay for the first time. which also had a beautiful sheen similar to the black earthenware clay. And I kind of, installed the houses in a way to indicate the symbolism of gentrification. And each of these houses are now, unlike the ticky-tacky version, these are all initialed at the bottom and dated at the bottom. And that's how I'm keeping track of, when did I make these houses and which section, which group is, are the houses, they're dated on the bottom. This was a very inspirational show curated by Taina Derivel. And because it pushed me outside of my boundaries a little bit, what the show's intention was to invite 5 artists and 5 writers to partner and to make 2 pieces of work. One work you start off with and give it to the writer, and the writer gives you their first work, and then you make another piece of work. Your second piece of work is inspired by that swap, by that trade. And so it was really, really amazing to be able to have a poet, Arsima McCoy, who was my partner in this project. And I didn't know her, and I didn't know who my partner was when we started. That was part of the intention of the exhibit. And so I started off with Displacement, which I had just shown at the African American Research Library in Fort Lauderdale. And she produced this beautiful poem, which it was in a written form like this, but she also made this video. So and presented the poem in a performance. And she talked a lot about, I think, about Seminole, and how the Seminole people are also, indigenous people are also displaced in America. And then this is the poem that she gave me first. This was her first work, called Simply Human. And this is the piece that I made inspired by her poem. It's called Syncopated Echo. And this piece is a little bit outside of my houses, but I included it in this discussion, A, because displacement is part of the group, but B, because it brings up the notion and the idea of the domestic, which I really feel is a big part of this series of work. And you'll see in some of the works that I show about inspiration, you'll see how kind of like home and belonging, kind of those ideas enter my work a lot. So after In Tandem, I was invited to participate in this initiative that was led by the African Heritage Cultural Arts Center in Miami and Sugarcane Magazine. There was a county-wide, Miami-Dade County-wide initiative on resiliency, environmental resiliency. And so they selected Morel Dusant, an artist, a Miami artist who I'm friends with, and myself to kind of discuss our work in this, I think it's about 25-minute video, which you can find if you Google search Morel's name or my name, it'll pop up. And so that was a great opportunity, although it's hard to, talk in front of bright lights about your work. It was a great opportunity to be able to, both partner with Morel and those 2 organizations, but also to kind of share my work in a different way than having an exhibition. This is the front cover of the exhibition of the film. And we also entered it into Black Femme Supremacy Film Festival, which was another nice way to kind of share my work. So the most recent exhibition that I'm in, which is up right now in Hollywood at the Art and Culture Center in Hollywood, is an exhibition called Introspective, A Reckoning of the Soul. And that was curated by Marie Vickles and Megan Kent. Marie Vickles is the curator at the Little Haiti Cultural Center and also the director of education at PAM. And so she has curated this beautiful, absolutely beautiful show in Hollywood. And it's up until February, the end of February, 2022. So you should definitely come visit Hollywood. This is where I live, in Hollywood. And you should definitely come and see the show. They have lots of family days. They have an event this Thursday with Kitty Oliver, who is a historian. And I think it's just a beautiful show. And this is kind of a new version of Displacement. My goal for myself in changing or making new work every time that I show my houses came about this time in a different way by kind of changing the way the lighting works. Lighting is very important to these works. And also, you can't really see them in these pictures, but my inspiration from the redlining maps, I took that inspiration, and underneath these houses, there's actually a vellum. So when you're looking at the work in person, there's a difference in opacity and the kind of on the bottom of on the top of the pedestal underneath the houses, giving you an idea of kind of a fictional narrative demonstrating how these different neighborhoods were chosen to be coded. You know, they had a red, yellow, blue, and green for the coding. And if it was a blue or green neighborhood, that means that you were able to move in, you were able to get a loan, everything was good, the proper funds were funded there, were pushed there. If it was a yellow neighborhood, it was a maybe not. And if it was a red neighborhood, you were definitely not going to be given a mortgage or insurance or anything to invest into that neighborhood. And of course, it had to do with race. So here's these are actually install shots, so it wasn't completely finished at this point. This one on this side on the right is the finished piece, how it ended up looking. But when I'm installing, it's kind of like it's an experiment every time I install. And so you can see the strings are kind of just hanging there because I'm trying different things there. So that's basically it for this group of work, but I wanted to show you about the process because Colette mentioned that the students that watch these films and that participate in these talks like to know about the process. So I'm going to kind of fly through a bunch of slides here about the process of making these houses.
Well, I just want to make a comment. It was very interesting to see how that project had evolved through the years from when you just first, when did you say you started working on?
A long time ago, like 2004, maybe.
That they've involved so much with, with the colors and the different materials. And then you said also adding the red lining and working with morale on gentrification and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So interesting.
Mm-hmm. So thank you. So I start with always a drawing. I have lots of drawings of lots of different ideas. This one is the drawing for the show that's currently up at the Hollywood Art and Culture Center. And of course, a big block of clay, 25 pounds, makes about 100 houses. And some of those pieces, like this one has 575 houses. This one has, I think like 500. So it's lots, hundreds of little houses. So the bag of clay first, I just start out making slabs. I use a wire cutter to cut them directly into slabs. And this is in my living room because I'm an artist without a studio.
I was going to ask you, where are you doing this? So you're doing this in your house.
My TV. This is actually right here.
Okay.
Like my sofa is right here. And so this is my coffee table. And my husband gets very upset because I use everything in the house, like knives and plates and towels. Anything from the house is part of the studio when I'm in the art making process. So then the whole house has kind of clay all over it.
And clay is a little bit messy. It's not, yes. Yeah, it's a little messy, right?
Yeah. Okay. So then I let them, this is really super wet clay. So I let it air dry a bit. And once it's starting to get leather hard, I cut them into strips. using my knife that I cut the chicken with later on. No, I'm just joking. Next, they get a little bit harder than that. And this is a kind of a quick process because it's really sensitive about, I don't know, like when you cover it, sometimes it gets too hard or not hard enough. And so I kind of just, when I start, it's like a boom, 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 like a one day after another day that I work on them. Then they start to get super, super leather hard, but they're still cold and wet. They're not dried, fully dried yet. But once they're a little bit harder, fully leather hard, then they're almost like the consistency of almost like chocolate, like a softer chocolate. So when you cut them, it's not messy anymore. It's no longer super duper messy. It's like you could get a super clean cut. And then I start to cut the pitches on the roof, and I don't measure or anything. Everything is just eyeballing. But when I first started, you see, can you see my pointer?
Yes, we see it.
So see these two houses here, you see the pitch is very more pointy, whereas the rest of them, the pitch is a little less pointy. What happened is that I started off just eyeballing it, making these pitches any old way. And then I started to get kind of like robotic about it. And then my pitches became perfect. And all of the houses, like the majority of the houses that I made, all have this pitch. And I think it's like kind of measuring with the tool that I was using and knowing where it goes, just eyeballing it. So this is when I start to get them dry. At this point, once they're fully air dried to be greenware, that's when I take a pin tool and I initial the bottom of every single one of them, 500, 600, sometimes, thousands of houses. And I put the date on the bottom of them. So then this is how they look. This is these same houses before firing and after the high fire. They get that glossy look. They kind of feel like chess pieces when you're moving them around. And then although I do a drawing in advance, when it's time for me to install them, this is the install at the African American Research Library in Fort Lauderdale, I kind of just dump them onto the pedestal wherever they're going to be. And I start to also eyeball it. But I do use a ruler, like a yardstick, to kind of straighten every line. And it's like a process for me to install it too. So I sometimes wish I could just give some directions to somebody else to do that. And I think that sometimes the different museums or galleries, they don't want necessarily for me to sit there for hours to do the install. But I feel like that's part of the piece. That installation of that piece is like a new painting every time, because I'm using the materials in a different way to install it. So that's a big part of it. So then the research that I was telling you about.
So how long would it take you, like, for example, to install that one work that you were just showing us?
This one, I did it over multiple days. Like I got to this far, I think I had an hour because, I'm always working my day job. And so oftentimes, sometimes the install has to be during business hours. And so, I take a lunch break or something, or come at the end of the day, take the last hour off of work. And so this day I only had an hour. And so I got to that far, and then I had to leave. The place was closing. And so I came back the next day. I think it must have taken like 5 hours total to install everything. So then the research for this series. I'm inspired a lot by this research, and it's based on history and social sciences. And I included this We Serve Whites Only here because I was thinking about, this is actually in Texas, not in Florida, this sign. But I was thinking about this over the spring break last year when we were going through the whole uproar of young Black youth kind of partying and letting loose after the pandemic in South Beach. And, as a kind of, I guess, racially ambiguous person who's multiracial, I was just thinking about the fact that sometime not too long ago, Black people or probably Hispanic, Afro-Hispanic people couldn't even go to South Beach without a card. You know what I mean? It was the sundown town.
Yeah. Mhm.
And so this made me think, wow, because, here in South Florida, we have a lot of Latinx folks who might kind of identify as white now, but at some time in history, they might not have been able to identify as white. So this kind of impressed upon me that, that fact.
No, that's a good analogy. I was thinking the same thing when they were talking about that. I think I read about it as well, that analogy of the sundown rule and people wanting to let loose after being held up in our apartments and houses for over a year. Yep.
So this is some of the research that I've been able to just find online. This is Miami, and this is 1940s and 1940, 46, and 50 documents showing how many Black people lived in various neighborhoods in Miami. So you can see, I actually work in Opa-locka right now. So this was interesting to me to see, because in Opa-locka in the 1940s, Opa-locka was built in the 1920s. And then they had a big kind of population boom. But then I think there was a hurricane, and the Great Depression had an effect. And so that the white people who lived in that town no longer were kind of living there anymore. So in 1940, there were only 9 Black housing units in Opa-locka. And then in 5 years, there was 300. And then 5 more years, 10 years later, there's 2,000. So I was actually searching because I was writing a civil rights grant for the city of, not for the city, but for Opa-locka Community Development Corporation, where I work. And it was a civil rights era grant. And so I started to research, and that's when I found all of this information, because I wanted to know, how has Opa-locka transitioned over the years? Because I knew that Glenn Curtis, an aviator, he built Opa-locka, kind of exotifying Arabic culture by making these neo-Moorish buildings. But this research, so that's how kind of my administrative work ends up tying into my artistic work. It's just kind of one pot, I guess, my brain. Here's some other.
That was a question I had for you. How is your curatorial or your art administrative work informing your art making, or vice versa? But yeah,
sometimes it really does, and sometimes it doesn't. Like many of my administrative roles, it does. Like when I was at the Young at Art Children's Museum for 17 years, definitely every curriculum that I was writing was inspired by something I was doing in the studio. But then by the time that I got to PAM and also the NSU Art Museum, I don't know, I think it was harder work. I had 40 team members that I was responsible for managing at the PAM. And I worked 7 days a week there, doing events and programming. And so I think I didn't even have really that much time to make that much artwork then, because I was just so focused on that role. But now in my role, it's just happening, and also being at home, working from home during the pandemic, and not having social things to go to after work and not having events to go to has allowed me kind of a mental space in order to make more art.
I remember running into you at an art event, and we were chit-chatting, and we were both sharing how busy we were. And you're like, yeah, I keep like 3 or 4 pairs of shoes in my car. So I can go to another event. And I'm like, I do that too. So I can switch my shoes and have comfortable shoes on. We were both sharing war stories. It was funny.
Yeah. And then the pandemic, it made me rethink I think I had an addiction to just going to many, many things and seeing everything.
I saw you everywhere. Yes, you were everywhere. Yes.
And now I'm like, oh no, I'm not leaving this house. I work here, I sleep here, I eat here. It's different now. I've become more of a kind of a homebody, just due to the practice of being at home over the whole pandemic. Yeah, so here are some more maps. This one's from 1990, so we're getting into kind of more, current times. This one is, I think, still from the 1940s. This map goes along with the list on the previous page, this one. And it's kind of showing you where Black people are allowed to live. Black people are not even allowed to live anywhere besides these little dots. And Opa-locka is here. I think this is probably Bunch Park, which is a historically Black section of Miami, North Miami. But Black people weren't allowed to live in Opa-locka in the 1940s. They were only allowed to live east of 27th Avenue, which is maybe somewhere around here. They weren't allowed to live where those neo-Moorish buildings were. They had to have a card. They had to have a card in order to go work as a domestic worker or building, maintenance or something like that. And then there's some historically Black spaces in the South. And of course, Overtown was the major Black district at the time. And then once the 95 was built in the 1950s, 60s, then those people got displaced and they had to have a resettlement. Those are the titles of my works. And that's when Liberty City was started. This is kind of a drawing and a map of Liberty City, of the decisions and lines that were being drawn of where Black people were allowed to live. And here's the redlining map. So there's those colors I was telling you about. The green and the blue spaces were A-okay. The yellow was a maybe not. And then the red was no mortgages were allowed to be given, and no insurance and no funding, no good schools. So these are some of the books that I've been looking at. The Color of Law is an amazing story about the entire nation and how redlining affected the entire nation and how policy affected, the whole country. And then these three books are more focused on South Florida and Miami.
Well, I read or I heard about how, buying a house is how families are able to accumulate wealth and pass it on from generation to generation. Mm-hmm. And that because African American and Black were not able to buy houses because they were being redlined. That's one of the reasons why, that systemic racism, it's built in to the system where mm-hmm. people can't accumulate wealth.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And then these are charts of social science charts of gentrification, trying to kind of articulate and frame how gentrification happens and how redlining happens. And I'm just obsessed with these because sometimes it's just one person's theory. It's not necessarily, reality, but it just is so interesting to me to try to figure out and articulate and document how this happens and how we can have things like this not happen. So just aesthetically and just conceptually, these charts just interest me. And I'm always kind of searching for this kind of information. And then outside of race, and the environment was a big part of our lives here in South Florida, because when I was looking for those other maps, and by the way, when I started Google searching, I was searching African American and Black and this and that, and I couldn't find anything, but I realized that the language in the 1940s was different. And so that's when I started to look up Negro housing units. And so that's where I was able to find more information. And then these maps are all about the Everglades and the draining of the Everglades. And so we all couldn't be here if the Everglades weren't drained. And this map shows where they drained from north of Okeechobee, Lake Okeechobee, to all the way here in Miami. All of that was drained. Same thing with this map. And now we're having this climate gentrification issue where neighborhoods that are built on higher land are more valuable, and people are starting to buy them up. So some of the same challenges that happened in the past based on race are still going to happen again and continue to happen for different reasons. So then my inspiration, aside from my research, which is also my inspiration, I have these kind of series that I work on a day-to-day basis when I'm not making art. And I use Instagram, which some people are against, but I go walking every morning. And remember I was telling you about the domestic and how, you know, living and where people live and neighborhoods and where people choose to live, it's part of my inspiration. And the Refuse series is also the similar thing, because when I'm walking, I have this narrative in my head and I see this furniture on the side of the road. And I'm wondering, you know, did this person have to leave their house because they had to leave because they got kicked out or because they didn't have the money for the rent anymore? Or is it that they don't want this piece of furniture anymore? I'm always wondering. That's the power and resistance in society and nature that I'm always kind of thinking about, that's in my artist statement, that is part of kind of my life and what I'm always thinking about. This gun, like I came across this painted, iridescent painted gun on the street one day when I was walking. I completely got freaked out, but it was a plastic gun. And so these are the things that I see and the things that kind of catch my eye on a day-to-day. This one is in Opalaka. How beautiful is this, with all these, you know, handleless drawers? I kind of want to take everything home too. I never take anything home, but when I post these, sometimes people ask me for the pin. They're like, where is that? I'm going to go get it. So I'm kind of like a free dumpster diving, Uber Eats for dumpster diving. I love this one. So interesting. This was like a piece of a table, a coffee table. It apparently had glass on it at one time. And this one had a sticker on it that said Rent a Center. And it had a date on it. So somebody had rented this from Rent a Center and then maybe rented to own a little gold plastic coffee table. And then it was in the side of the garbage. And so I was like, oh, this is very interesting when I'm walking. And so I took a few pictures and posted it in my series. This one is a beautiful old desk. This is in Overtown. No parking. The desk is not allowed to park there. And some days I see these things and I walk by the next day and some things are gone. The garbage truck didn't come yet, but they disappear, or maybe sometimes the garbage truck comes. The other thing is that I noticed they're always on the first of the month. And I don't know if that's because, you know, people have to move out at the first of the month, or because the bulk garbage pickup day is at the first of the month. I have no idea. So that's that series, but there's hundreds of these that you can see on Instagram if you look at the hashtag refuse series. Another series is called Fundera, and that word is a Garifuna name for window. And this is because this whole series was done in Belize on one of my trips to Belize. And of course, I became obsessed with their windows. This one reminded me of in Haiti, they have ceremonial drawings that they draw with chalk and with powder on the floor. And this kind of reminded me of that. I think it's Veve, but I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. This one was interesting because of all the layers and opacities and textures that showed up. And then here's just one full house. I was mostly taking close-ups, but I wanted to show you where I was when I was taking these pictures. The third series of inspiration is called Map. And this is actually Pam backwards, because
I was going to say those look like Pam buttons that I have a million of.
Yeah, that's what they are. They're Pam buttons. And Pam has this parking garage that has gravel in it. And so every day when I worked at Pam, I walked to my car and I'd pick up a pin, and that my collection would grow and grow and grow. And this I put in here because how similar are these squares to the look of my houses? It really reminded me of the houses. And so that's why I chose to put that in here. Sometimes there's a random ICA pin at Pam too. Sometimes they're so old that they're kind of eaten away. And nowadays at Pam, they don't have the pins anymore. They have the wristbands. And so these are the only pins in history Probably the rustier ones are probably from when that building opened in 2013 to some that are kind of still clean and not rusted yet. Talking about time, you know. So the last section of my talk is about a few pieces of work that are not part of the Houses series. And because I wanted to show you just some other works that are kind of similar and related, but different. And you can see older works on my website at adriennechadwick.com. But this is a series called Ebb and Flow. And the show that I brought this piece to in Fort Lauderdale, this is what the installation looked like. It was about 29 feet wide and about 24 feet tall. These are all plastic bags. I was thinking about just aesthetically about layers and how different layers make different colors, and kind of painting with materials, which is kind of what I do. I'm actually a painting major, but I don't paint at all anymore. I just kind of make these two-dimensional, three-dimensional, and sculptural installation-based works. And these all spun around and got tangled up. This is a big garage space that doesn't have air conditioning. So they have this fan over here and the garage doors, and if it's windy, these things got all tangled up. So I learned something in this experiment that I should have nailed them to the ground. These are weights, fishing weights at the bottom, lead fishing weights. And so I should have actually, in the future, I'll definitely drill.
Where was this at again?
In Fort Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale.
This is a close-up of that Ebb and Flow series. Tweezing History is a time-based work also that it's kind of gross, but I would, over like a multi-year period, I used to tweeze my eyebrows, and I took every single tweezing of every single brow and I glued it to a roll of receipt paper. And on the bottom, you can see these words. This is a story about all the women in my family from the last 3 generations. They all had different thicknesses of eyebrows based on style. My mom's eyebrows were super thin in the 70s, and my grandma before that, they were super thick. And then I had this in between size eyebrows, like thin on one side and thick on the other side. Now thick eyebrows are in style, if you didn't know that yet, and big eyelashes. So I don't pluck my eyebrows now anymore. So this series is over. But over the pandemic, I quit that. But you could see it's really gross. Some people get really grossed out about this. But you can see the hairs there. It's talking about the commodification of beauty and about style.
Was this in Fort Lauderdale?
I showed this in this show, Femininist. It was in Sistrunk. And actually, this piece is no longer in existence. It got lost.
Oh,
It got like, somebody thought it was garbage. They just threw it out, I think.
Oh, no.
But I tried to make it again before the pandemic when I was still tweezing my eyebrows. I tried to make it again, but I haven't. This is like a kind of an oil-based kind of coverage that I put on it to make it look old. So now I have a new one, a new scroll of paper, but it's just white paper now. So I don't know. We'll see. I have to write the story on it.
But tweezing your eyebrows isn't as important anymore, like you said.
Yeah. So now it's over. It's over because I quit.
Right.
You know. Right. Now I'm trying to, you know, I'm fashion and and I guess beauty regimen is like they're merging right now because it's perfect. No more bushy eyebrows are in style, and I don't have to tweeze anymore. And then my artwork is over. Okay, so these are some of this is pretty much the end of my talk, but these are some of the museums I've worked at and organizations that I've worked at over the years. I started off in children's museums in 27 years ago and worked at Young at Art for 17 years. I started there at 17, so that's why, you know, 27 years sounds like a long time, but I did start very early. While I worked at Young at Art, I worked at Miami Children's Museum and the Art Gallery of Ontario. Then I switched out of children's museums and got my first gig at the Fort Lauderdale Art Museum, NSU Art Museum, Fort Lauderdale. After that, I was recruited by PAM and worked there. During my time at PAM, I did a short-term kind of visiting lecture class at the University of Miami. Left Miami altogether for a year right before COVID and worked at the Mississippi Museum of Art in Jackson, Mississippi, which was an amazing experience, but came back after COVID. And now I'm working with my own company, Culture Conduit, which is a consulting firm that I've had for the last 2 years. And I'm also working with Opalaka Community Development Corporation, which is my first kind of full-time role outside of the museum world. And it's been very rewarding to be working for an organization that focuses on affordable housing and small business development and wraparound services, health and educational services for people in Northwest Miami-Dade County. It's really connecting with me and connecting with my art. And so I think that's, and my education, you already said that, though, Colette, in my bio. I went to New World School of the Arts, which was Miami-Dade College and University of Florida for the second 2 years. And my Master of Public Administration at Nova Southeastern. When I worked at the NSU Art Museum, I was able to do my master's there. And that's it. So this is a way for everyone to reach me on my website, on my Gmail, and on my social medias. Everything is Adrienne Chadwick.
Thank you, Adrienne. That was your work is very powerful and inspirational. I think it's I remember one time I saw your work, I think at the Little Haiti Cultural Center, if I remember correctly. It was found wires that you had found, or little springs or something, and you had documented it on your Instagram, where I had followed you on Instagram, where you were picking up these, and then I saw your work at the Little Haiti Center, and there they were in this.
Yep, that's one of the series. I opted to leave that one out this time, but that one's another fun ongoing time-based series that it's like Adrienne walking around strangely in Hollywood, looking at things on the floor, taking pictures.
It was really nice to see your work there, because it was right. Well, it was last Art Week, which was, I guess, 2020. We were still in the pandemic, and I only went to a couple places. I was scared to go out, but I did venture out into the world with my mask, and I was being very careful. And I left really early in the morning so there wouldn't be crowds. And I went to the Little Haiti Cultural Center because I always loved the exhibitions. I wanted to see Marie Vickles, and I saw your work there. I was really happy. I have a really great question for you. Going on the assumption that, hold on, I've got all these little pop-ups on my computer. Hold on just a second, just went away. Going on the assumption that our lived experiences inform our creative decisions, can you speak to any work that directly correlates to your childhood?
I think everything directly correlates to my childhood. And some folks weren't on the talk when I first started, but the PowerPoint started with a picture of myself in my treehouse in Carroll City, with a drawing that I made. And I talked about the fact that I wanted to be a scientist, an artist, a teacher, and a boss. And I thought that my art administrative work is kind of a grouping of all of those things. And so I do think that everything, including the fact that I'm a Canadian with a green card, living in Miami with a green card for 43 years, my entire life, pretty much 44 years. It kind of always makes me a little bit of an outsider. So I can never be a Floridian. But I am a Floridian because I've been here for 44 years. So, but I'm not, because I'm Canadian. And also same thing with my culture and kind of who I am. I think it all is related to my artwork.
Have there been any major, so when you graduated with your BFA, you immediately started, or you were already working at art,
Young at Art.
young at arts when you
Mhm,
got your BFA.
mhm.
So was there any major mentors, or were there any people that really influenced you during your time that you think really made an impact on your career, and why you decided, if you're getting your degree in painting, and then you decided that you wanted to work as an administrator or as a behind the scenes more so?
Mhm. Well, I guess that if you think about the timeline, um, I kind of knew in high school that I wanted to be an artist because I was taking advanced placement in 11th grade. I took one advanced placement art class, and then in senior year, I took two advanced placement AP studio art, drawing, 2D art, 3D art, and so on. So I knew I wanted to be an artist, and I was able to know that I wanted to be an artist, whereas I think many or some middle class people like myself, immigrant families like myself particularly, I don't think that they would feel comfortable wanting to know that they're gonna try to be a professional artist. But I was able to do that because I have my paternal aunt is an artist, a full-time practicing artist, and I think that seeing her in my childhood let me know that you could do that. You know what I mean? Somebody could do that. And also my mom, she's an artist as well and a very creative person. But she has her BFA also. She did it later, kind of later in life, but she started off as a teacher and she was an art teacher. And so I guess I kind of just, the apple didn't fall very far from the tree in that respect. So yeah.
Thank
And then
you.
all along the way, there were mentors all along the way, starting from my high school art teacher, Nella Goldenberg at Miramar High School. And then when I was working at the Young at Art Children's Museum, Mindy Schrago was my boss there, and Melanie Cohen was my kind of my first boss there. They were mentors the whole way. And then also at New World School of the Arts, when I was doing my BFA, Aramis O'Reilly, I think he's still a teacher there. He was a mentor. Just all along the way, I'm picking up, these different mentors, and they're just pushing me along the way, and my mom, of course, my family. So
Wonderful. It sounds like you had some great people putting you in the right direction, like with Mindy and Aramis and your mother and your aunt. That's wonderful.
mhm.
We're almost out of time, so I want to be conscious of that. If you had one piece of advice for students, what would that be? I mean, you have such a nice career that you can talk about working in museums and your own art making. What would that advice be?
My advice to students who want to be professional artists is to not be an administrator. Do not step foot into a museum, because the problem is that it's fun and meaningful and wonderful to be working in a museum, but then you kind of you just kind of get stuck into that world because it's doable, it's creative and inspirational, and you're working with artists. So if you want to be a professional artist, I would say do not do it. Do something else. Go work in some other field, insurance, I don't know, something else.
So you don't think it gave you an edge having that?
No, I'm not a full-time
Really?
practicing artist. I'm an administrator.
I know, but you are an artist. You have all these
No, I
wonderful.
can't pay my bills from being an artist.
Okay, but you know how to
And
write
I don't
grants.
have a studio.
But you know how to write grants.
I know, but so who cares? I don't want to write grants. I want to make art in my studio all day
Okay.
and make a living from it.
Okay. All right. Well, Adrienne, it's always great to see you and to catch up with you. And hopefully we will run into each other at a face-to-face event, hopefully soon, when everybody is safe, and it's good to do that. It's safe to do it for everyone. So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us. Stay safe, and I will hopefully see you all soon. Thank you again, Adrienne, and thank you
Thank
everyone for
you.
joining us. Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Good night.
Thank you.